Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we have a debate between Team Morocco and Team Tunisia. The topic for today's debate is that this house believes that standardized testing is the enemy of learning. Team Morocco would be opposition and Team Tunisia would be proposition. On Team Tunisia, we have the first speaker is Rim, the second speaker is Amir, the third speaker will be Zainab, and the reply speaker would be Amir as well. For Team Morocco, we have our first speaker as Iman. The second speaker would be Alia. The third speaker would be Yanis, and Alia would be doing the reply speech. So without further ado, let's get started with the first speaker from Team Tunisia. Please welcome Rim.
Thank you. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, we are seeing every day how students are being stressed out, depressed, and really suffering from these tests and exams. We are seeing, whenever it is exam period, masses of videos of youngsters expressing their suffering, floods the different social media platforms. Very huge suffering is hidden behind these sarcastic videos. It may be sometimes like kind of jokes and something like that, but those people are really stressed out, and they are losing very much of their youth and their time and stress, while those young children especially should be having fun while learning to get more good education. We also know that science education has shown that these testing is probably something not is an enemy for education. Is the an enemy for education. It doesn't help students improve, or instead it, yes.
Do you have any evidence and proof and real science studies that have shown that these standardized tests are enemies for education?
Thank you. I think this is something really known, and we are talking about it everywhere on social media and everywhere. It's something I think it's evident, and I don't have to prove anything, any scientific thing. Okay, because when I will explain more this in my arguments, and so I will. So before starting my arguments, I have some keyword to define. What we mean by standardized test is any form of test that requires all test takers to answer the same questions, or a selection of questions from common bank of questions in the same way, and that is scored in a standard or consistent manner. So I will be answering in the speech two major questions: how this is ruining the psychology of students, and how the ruining of this psychology is affecting the learning in a more bad way. First, when talking about youngsters, those young children are especially when we are talking about youngsters, their psychology is built in a way that they always compare themselves to other children more than adults do. They always want to be more. They're especially in this time proving themselves, their personalities. They want to prove how capable they are and how good they are in everything, their parents, to the society, to their teachers. So by giving these standards, we are enhancing this and putting more pressure on them, because those young children are very focused on getting a higher mark, as I said, no matter what it takes, even if higher marks doesn't always mean a better student. You can study hard and don't get higher marks because you fear tests, you have anxiety problems, or even because maybe you worked all the semester and got sick in the exam period, and then you didn't pass your exam in the normal circumstances. So this doesn't really define who you are. These tests are only getting as standard students, and are killing the creativity that can be be fined upon those students. As well, we are thus putting some more pressure on these youngsters who should have fun during the learning, and thus when they are from a very young age stressed about education, they will tend more and more.
Why?
No, thank you. More and more to hate education, and thus since they are every impression we got, an impression we've got very at a very young age.
This thing is $300. Boy next door.
Fucking slaves, get your ass back here!
Oh my God. We're so I forgot what I think. So okay, an impression what we got at a very early age is not simply erased. So we are, but these exams are making more and more people hating learning, and thus less improving in learning, and thus less more good education. Second, this children will have undying want for higher marks, even if they already have very good marks. They are always willing and to have more and more, and probably they will be very harsh on themselves.
Why?
No, thank you. As a consequence, they are risking to burn out, and thus they may have sleeping disorders, anxiety, which can lead to hair loss, depression. They are even risking losing human connection, since they will be working the majority of their time, especially and being very harsh on themselves. They will have no time for socializing, neither for hobbies. We will actually be producing robots rather than students. We don't want this to happen in our world. Even if you have higher marks and other students have even higher ones, but just with a little difference, even with a little difference, you will feel stressed to follow that person and get higher marks than him. This will create sort of jealousy between students, and will risk more and more conflicts between those young children who would have been, especially at a young age, they would have been very connected to each other. They would have been making friends, and it will be a very bad competition because it's based on jealousy. So when it comes to comparing, when it comes to comparing a world without these standardized tests and a world with these standardized tests, it is clearer than standardized tests are being the enemy of the education, especially when we see that in Finland, which has the best education and one of the best education in the world, there are no mandated standardized tests in Finland. Apart from one exam at the end of students' senior year in high school, there are no rankings, no comparison, no competition between students, schools, or regions. Finland's schools are publicly funded, which give us a very good example to follow in our case. And so I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. By the way, I apologize for the little interruption. I don't know how that happened, but I do apologize for that. Okay, so let's move on to the opposition team. On opposition team, the first speaker will be Iman. So without further ado, please start your speech whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. We live in a world that has for over a century been using standardized tests as a way to compare students nationwide and worldwide as well. It has proven to be an effective way for colleges and universities to differentiate students and admit the ones that they think are a best fit, especially selective universities that receive thousands and thousands of applications annually and have to make very difficult choices on the admission side and life-changing event on the student side. Therefore, we, Team Morocco, are defending the status quo by being opposed to the following motion. This house believes that standardized tests is the enemy of learning. Now, before moving on with the rest of my speech, I'll be doing some rebuttal to what have been said from the first speaker on the other team. One of their main points was students are suffering from standardized tests, that it takes a toll on their mental health, and that they are not having fun while they are young. But to that we say that students are stressed out anyways, with or without standardized tests. They have tests at school as well that are graded, and that stresses them out like way more. But even since they will be taking way more of those than standardized ones, like you take tests at schools all the time, but standardized tests are taken only 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. This argument is against grading and taking tests in general, and not only standardized ones. Therefore, we believe it's irrelevant to this motion. And now, moving to my mechanism. Before going on with my speech, I'll be stating the mechanism, which is standardized testing on our side is defined as tests like SAT, ACT, IB, and many other tests that are the same worldwide for everyone. Now, I'll be stating our burdens. To win this debate, we'll have to prove that, firstly, standardized tests provide a good standard good standard for students' capacities compared to other students on a worldwide scale, and to prove that standardized tests are a valuable learning tool as well. Now, I'll be moving to the short-term outcome that I'll be explaining in details. Without standardized tests, universities, and just like schools in general, would not have the opportunity to effectively compare students' abilities. It's no secret that universities and just schools choose the students that they want to admit based on comparison in grades, essays, and activities. So without standardized tests, a lot of good students will lose the chance to prove how good they are and that they are deserving of taking a spot in the best universities and schools worldwide. For example, a student who lives, let's say, in India, France, Bangladesh, goes to a school where it's very hard to get a good grade, and even an average one, not even good. But on the other hand, a student who lives in the US, for example, in one of the easiest educational systems worldwide, who takes part of the American school system, it's much easier for him to get an A, since the material taught in school is much easier in comparison with other countries, and also get the chance to retake their exams in some schools, which is completely unfair for the others. On the educational system to be, which makes it very difficult for other students in other educational systems to be on the same level. So, what this looks like in real life is that in our world, team opposition, all students get judged on the same criteria, using the same scale, and take the same tests nationwide and worldwide, so that all of them get judged based on their true level and how good they are, without the difference between the without taking into consideration the difference between the education systems. In our world, students who live in countries such as the US, who are privileged by money and having the opportunities to have many extracurricular activities, and they also get tutoring to make up for their bad grades, do not have an advantage over others who do not have these resources. Those underprivileged children are given the same opportunities on our world and provided by tests that are standardized, and for the minority that may not be able to afford taking those tests, different free waivers are offered, unlike on the propositions world, where students who go to schools where it's much easy to get a good grade get an advantage and get the chance to get into top schools, even though there are many other students who are way more worthy of that position and that place. And we're unlucky because they went to the schools where it was much harder to get a good grade, or just were simply born in countries where the educational system is much tougher when it comes to grading. And we know that proposition may claim that there are many other ways for students to prove their academic level, but this isn't taken into consideration the difference between the grading systems between schools and between countries in general, and the difference in how harsh students are graded, since let's keep in mind that grading students is a completely subjective thing to do, and it's completely up to students, to teachers, unlike with standardized tests that are graded by computer software and completely objective. So if there's no, therefore we believe that standardized testing isn't the enemy of learning. On the contrary, it makes it more beneficial. Now, if there's a PY, I'll be taking it before moving on with the rest of my speech. Since I see there's any, I'll be moving on. Now, I'll move on to stating our principled argument. Our main principled argument is that governments have a duty to protect students' future. If you choose our policy, opposition's policy, then you are choosing a world where students have the advantage of proving their worth to universities other than their academic grades. Students would have to compensate by adding even more energy to prove themselves to universities, due to the government removing a valuable asset, which is standardized test scores from a student's application. Again, if there is a PY, I'll be taking it right now because I'm close to the end. I see there's any, so I'll be closing my speech very, very soon. Now, as for the long-term outcome, we team opposition believe that without standardized tests, students who are capable and very much deserving to get into their desired universities have their chances taken away, which means that real talent goes unnoticed, and this is very unjust for those students. And well, overall, just like our societies in general, since we're not putting the good talents and capacities we have in the places, in positions they are very deserving of. So, and this will be explained in details and with more clarity and examples in the second speech with the second speaker on my team. And this will be the end of my speech. Thank you very much for listening, and we urge you to vote for Team Morocco.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now be calling on the second speaker of Team Tunisia, Amir.
Some seconds to set my timer, please.
Sure.
So I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, welcome to our debate today. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wanted to prepare more for a test, but you couldn't buy the books needed? Have you ever struggled with a subject that you will sit for in a standardized test, but you couldn't manage that and get over it because you did not have the money to pay for a private tutor or a special course? This, in the status quo, in reality, is the struggle of many students all around the world. Students that want to get to their dream colleges, to succeed on their standardized tests in order to achieve their dreams, but they do not have the money to make such goals come true. In a world where learning is a mere trade, in a world where the more you pay, the more you can learn, and therefore the more you can do on a test, standardized tests are the enemy of learning. That's why I'm very proud to propose for today's motion, which is this House believes that standardized tests are the enemy of learning. Before starting my speech, I want to rebut a main point of the previous opposition speaker. First, opposition speaker, you are saying that the standardized tests are a good tool to compare students' abilities, but you are wrong. Indeed, these tests give the privilege to people who have the money to practice more and get the high-level tutoring and the prep material. So students who are smart and who do have have the intellectual curiosity and ability to learn and enter the college they deserve, but do not have the money to pay for this preparation courses or tutoring, they are put in a great disadvantage. In fact, they won't have the chance to demonstrate their ability simply because they do not have to pay for this test or to pay for the prep of the test. So this will not give them. Yes, please.
Do you know that there are many programs online that are offered for students and are completely free that help them with preparing for their tests, such as Khan Academy, such as many YouTube channels, many YouTube channels that help with that. As for the fee for the test, there are free waivers. I will respond to the point.
I got you. So yeah, we acknowledge that there are free prep material, but they are not enough. They are not. They do not. They are not precise enough. There are some free tools that they are not helpful at all, because there are many other costly materials that are designed for students. This free prep are not designed for each student. They are common for all of them, so they do not help them as much as the private tutoring and courses do. So following my rebuttal, this will not give the chance to people to show their learning abilities, but rather they will show how much they are willing to pay, or to what extent they are able to route information, and this especially the case of international students. International students these courses are not suitable for international students because they all come from different backgrounds. Khan Academy, which is a US-based company that deliver the content for US students, and so students all around the world want to take this test are put in great disadvantage, especially if they do not have the means to pay for this tests. This is not a tool to compare students. This creates a gap between students because many of them do not have the ability to pay in international currencies to get the prep to register at this test and eventually to submit their scores. So now let's go to my argument. Standardized tests are an enemy of learning, as they are charging students a lot of money and are trading knowledge. We live in a world where everything can be bought by money, and this has reached learning too, and is killing it by standardized tests. Standardized tests are usually tests that are designed to require students more practice and to follow certain strategies. However, students do not know the good way to practice for the tests and can't find the good strategies by themselves. So we can notice that the rise of many tutoring companies that are selling books, material, and even offering their services for students who can pay for it. So people who do not have the money to pay for the tests or books will find themselves at a great disadvantage in comparison with their mates, and so they cannot demonstrate their learning abilities. Indeed, they won't be able to practice more before this test. This will create a big gap between students who have the money to pay, practice, and get the tutoring they need, and students who cannot. So this is do not value knowledge, nor students who are smart and eager to learn and excited to discover new things. They are making knowledge a luxury, a privilege to a minority of students who get the best tools to learn and get the knowledge they are seeking, and in order to succeed and ensure success in the future, and getting to the college they seek. These companies that are managing the standardized tests are even investing their efforts in order to make the candidates pay more and more money. For example, students are allowed to take the tests for more than one time, as much as they can, as long as they can pay for it. So if you have the money, you can learn from your mistakes. You can pay more. You can pay another test fee and enjoy the process. However, if you do not have the money to pay for the standardized test cost another time, you do not have the money. You do not have the chance to learn more, to know your mistakes, and to try hard to have better performance and succeed this test in order to get to your dream college. That's how standardized tests are the enemy of learning, as they do not offer the same chances to all the students who are seeking to learn and demonstrate their assessments of why they are learning to get into college. This inequality that the standardized tests are creating between different students, not only in the US but in all the corner of the globe, is killing learning. They are making students who do not have the money fear sitting for the test. They are making them doubting their abilities and their readiness. They do not, as they do not have the money to pay for another test cost. They are even making them worrying how to manage to pay for the test results to be sent to the universities. That's how centralized tests are killing learning. I'm very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now call on the team speaker, the second speaker of Team Morocco, Alia. So please start your speech whenever you're ready.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start my timer right now. To win this debate, we have to prove that, number one, that standardized tests provide a good standard to comparisons capabilities on a worldwide scale for universities, and that two, standardized tests are a valuable learning tool. And by failing to respond to these arguments, the other side is already losing this debate. In addition, their arguments fail to meet their burdens. They needed to prove that one, without standardized tests, education can effectively compare students' abilities, and that two, without standardized tests, students won't be pressured to obtain certain scores to get into universities or to have extracurriculars that they cannot obtain in their country or in their school. In my speech, I will do three things. Number one, I will respond to their main arguments, which are that, number one, SAT and standardized tests are stress-inducing and negatively impacting students' psychological state, and two, standardized tests are unfair for poor, low-income students. Secondly, I will talk about the long-term change, and finally, I will talk about the principles in this debate. So firstly, let's do some rebuttal. The opposition has tried to tell you the standardized tests are expensive and thus restrictive to learners, that because they are expensive, poor, low-income students do not have the opportunity to take it. This, however, is a completely false characterization. There are scholarships and countless programs that exist for low-income students to take the test at a lower cost or for free. Students who show potential at school have the opportunity to be given a waiver and take the test for free. Programs like No Child Left Behind specifically target these children. There also exists free tutoring programs and tests online for prep work. There have been countless students who haven't had tutors, who have found resources online like College Prep, Khan Academy, who have gotten perfect scores without tutors. And these brilliant students, like the proposition has characterized, will find the resources to succeed. Tutors and money are not mutually exclusive for standardized tests. This applies to normal exams at school, where some students have advantages over others. But we tell you that just because students have tutors does not mean that we should entirely remove standardized tests for everyone. We tell you that removing the SAT further widens the gap and the disparity between these students, especially for students of low income and poor developing countries or rundown schools, because education systems in these schools are limited in terms of extracurriculars and other opportunities, which means that students have little to nothing to showcase in their resumes when applying to university, as opposed to richer, more developed schools that provide countless programs and countless extracurriculars for their students to participate in. For these low-income students, the SAT is a necessity. We tell you that removing the SAT has disastrous effects and that the proposition is providing you with more harms than benefits. So I will move on to my arguments, specifically the long-term change. Without standardized tests, students who are capable and deserving to get into their desired universities have their chances taken away, and ultimately real talent goes unnoticed. In the current status quo, students are expected to take standardized tests like the SAT and the ACT to measure their abilities in comparison to the rest of the world. The standardized tests provide a benchmark for universities and other institutions to compare, no thank you, and contrast students' abilities with the same level of questions. Many students depend on the SAT and the ACT to prove to universities that they meet the requirements of learning and have the potential to get in their desired universities. The SAT, and other, no thank you, and other forms of standardized tests provide students the opportunity to prove themselves on an academic level, an opportunity that many students in poor, low-income countries do not have the chance to. Removing the SAT and other standardized tests would be removing students' opportunity to showcase their academic abilities that meets the universal benchmark. That would mean that thousands, if not millions of students would be deprived of their chance to demonstrate their abilities and their hours of studying. This is especially true for students in poor, developing countries. Education systems in these schools, like I've explained, have limited opportunities for their students. In Morocco, for example, there are little to no opportunities for competitions, for wide-scale projects and programs that students can dazzle universities with. Let's take the example of a brilliant Moroccan student who excels in mathematics. This student lives in a run-down, lower-class neighborhood, and their school is not internationally renowned nor recognized by American, Canadian, or English governments. This Moroccan student, who studies relentlessly, is not given the chance, does not have any extracurriculars on her application, nor does she have any impressive competitions, given the lack of those in Morocco. Thus, her only chance of dazzling universities would be by taking the SAT and obtaining an amazing score, which she spends hours and weeks working on. This Moroccan student represents the millions of students who rely, depend, and need the standardized tests to guarantee their future. Removing these tests would be stealing these students' opportunities to reach their potential, their success, and their access to the best education systems in the world. For some, the standardized tests may be inconvenience, but for these people, it is another chance at life. It represents another chance at succeeding. We know that the opposition will try to tell you that standardized tests should be removed because they don't match with every type of learner, because they're stressful, because some students have difficulty adjusting to these tests, because they're not good test takers. This argument, however, is completely irrelevant when taking into consideration that the SAT, ACT are tests that people spend months preparing for, and they're tests that can be taken over and over again. Stress is not mutually exclusive in this debate. It applies to every, no thank you, it applies to every exam. Money is not mutually exclusive, and tutors are not mutually exclusive in this debate. They apply to every exam. We tell you, however, that the SAT, ACT are unique in that they give the opportunity for others to retake them. I, for instance, did not receive a satisfactory score the first time I took it, but I studied using free resources online, and I obtained the score that I wanted. Thus, the SAT is not about excluding learners. It is about teaching students the price of hard work and measuring both their intelligence and their dedication. Thus, let's compare the two worlds. The proposition is offering you a world that would remove an opportunity from millions of poor, low-income students. They are giving you a world where a Moroccan student, a Tunisian student, any student in a developing country would not have the chance to prove themselves to universities, where richer students in the United States or other developed countries would have greater chances of getting into prestigious universities. They continuously tell you about the disparity between the rich and the poor, how the SAT is creating these gaps, when in reality, what they're doing is further widening the gap between these students. We've told you that in our world, we give students the chance of proving their abilities and their competence at a universal scale. We've provided benefits that the proposition cannot claim in this debate, and thus we urge you to vote for the opposition. So now I'm going to move on to the principles in this debate. The major principle in this debate is that we have a responsibility, the education system has a responsibility to give students a fair and equal chance at learning. If you choose our policy, opposition's policy, you're choosing a world where students have the advantage of proving their worth to universities other than their academic grades. Students would not have to compensate by adding extracurriculars that they don't have the chance to get, by adding opportunities that they do not simply have. They depend on this SAT, and thus it is important that we keep it and that we cherish it and that it remains in the education system, because it is not an evil to the education system, but rather the only chance at a successful education that students have. And thus we urge you to vote for opposition. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now have the third speaker of Team Tunisia, Zina.
Yes, I will just set my timer and start. Okay, I'll be starting in 1, 2, 3. I'll be answering 2 questions in the debate. Is standardized tests benefiting the students more? And second, which word is giving students justice and same opportunities? What did we tell you? We told you that schools are already stressful now. For students. And what makes it worse is that standardized tests are putting on students pressure, because they will be too focused and too stressed about grading, marks. They will be really bad. Therefore, it will be a really bad competition, and students will suffer from really self-esteem when they didn't get the outcome they needed and they wanted, and also school will transfer from an educational environment to a really stressful environment. But all we got for our argument was that standardized tests were used for centuries, so we should keep our habits and stick to our old habits, although they are toxic and bad for our students. Also, they said that school environment is stressful enough with or without tests. First, we never said that we are removing stress completely, but we said that in our words, stress will be decreasing hugely in comparison to your words. And second, you have agreed to our argument when your second speaker said that such pressure is stuck to every exam. So you know that every exam comes a lot of pressure and a lot of hard work that will put students in a stressful environment. Therefore, you know that what pressure would look like on students. They said that students will be tested, and how now we will know university will know how to accept students based on their exams. But this year, universities like Harvard, Brown, UPenn has dropped the SAT and SAT test scores for this year due to COVID, which prove that there are other ways more effective and better than SAT to know the real level for students. They said that real talents will go unnoticed, but how about students who is really bad students in math and a really bad student in science, but a really talented student in art? How would he? How that will put him first in a lot of pressure and a lot of pressure trying to please his parents and his students. Second, he will go unnoticed and his real talent will be hidden. They said that they are giving the same opportunity from students from India and students from the US. While students from the US, which has received one of the best educations in the world and has studied under the best with the best teachers in the world and has paid a lot of and thousands of dollars of money and his parents invested in him, while students in India did not get this opportunity and was unprivileged. Therefore, he will not be as prepared as these students from the US. Therefore, your whole example about the students and your whole comparisons about the US and the Indian students is irrelevant to our case. and actually it is in our side of the house, because in our side of the house you want students to get equal chances. When students from India is talented enough and students from the US is talented enough, he will be shown without a standardized test, because students from the US will have pay thousands and thousands of dollars in order to get the perfect exam, while students in India will not have the enough resources and enough funds to pay that. Which leads me to my second point, where we have told you that education will transform in a market where whoever pays more money will get a better education. Whoever gives more receives more, and even Team Up has agreed with us on this idea with their example in comparison about the US and India, and I have clearly explained it. They claim that they are giving students justice, but in reality they are wrong. For Team Up, students who is from the US and from India will be given the same opportunity, while in reality, not in their pink world that they are trying to keep us in. Students from the US and students from India are totally different and will never be given the same opportunity when they are tested on the same exam and on the same SAT exams. Therefore, no equal chances. Therefore, SAT and standardized tests are not a good standardized tests. So your whole first point false. Second, you said that you needed to prove that SATs are valuable tools to get students accepted to universities, but I have clearly explained that big universities, well-known universities such as Harvard, Brown, UPenn, MIT, Stanford, and thousands more of universities in whole the US have dropped the SAT scores for this year, which proven that SAT is not and will never be a valuable tool. They have preferred the extra curriculum. Such universities have preferred knowing you in a person and not knowing your mark, because your mark will not and will never define who you are. And we have proven that. Our second speaker, you can get sick in the night of your exam. You can pass the exam 3 times and be sick, and it's right. Accidents happen for good students. Therefore, you cannot just say that, oh, you did not pass it well in the first exam, then you will pass it the second time. Oh, you will pass better and third time. This is not how it works. Students will get low self-esteem. Therefore, they will not pass it in a better way in the third and fourth time, and will be under a lot of pressure because they know they need that perfect score to be competitive enough to get to that certain university. But in our world, in the real world we are defending here today, not the world you have described, because we are the ones who want equal opportunities. We are the ones that want students to be equal to each other, and we are the ones that are defending justice. You have said then that there will be scholarships and that there are online free courses that are free. But okay, let's agree. There are scholarships. I totally agree with you on that point. But how many? Will it benefit 1 student, 2 students, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100? What about the thousands more that are still not benefiting from scholarships? Because we all know that scholarships are limited first and are given to the most needed ones. What about the medium class students just like me, that I had to pay to get my SAT? Who told you that my parents and my family had enough funds to pay for me? And also you have said that Khan Academy is providing students with online free courses, and that this can cover and recover students from the real classes that they taken in US. But this is wrong, because first, Khan Academy will not give you the full course unless you pay more, and I have tried that because I have revised my SAT to Khan Academy and did not get the proper outcome that I was looking for. Second, no, this is protected time. Second, Khan Academy will never be in the same level as real classes in the US. Therefore, you are not giving students better opportunities, and you are not giving students justice. So your second point false. therefore, standardized tests are not a good way to grade people and compare them, and they are not a valuable tool. We can obviously get rid of them. So Team Prop is obviously winning this debate. Therefore, I'm proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now have the third speech from Team Morocco. Yanis, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, just give me a second. My computer is a bit laggy right now. I'm trying to get a hold of my document, but it's not really scrolling anything. Just give me a second. Sorry about that.
Yanis, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, my document is still freezing. I'm trying to solve this issue.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, now it's working. Just a minute, timer. Okay, can you hear me? 3, 2, 1. I will first be addressing the flaws in government's case that prevent them from fulfilling their burden regardless of our case. As a reminder, their burdens were to prove that 1, standardized tests, without standardized tests, education can effectively compare students' abilities, and that number 2, without standardized tests, students won't be pressured to have certain scores to get into certain universities. So they say throughout their entire speeches, they simply asserted their main arguments repeatedly without proving an actual mechanism. They repeatedly said that number 1, standardized tests are stressful, and number 2, are not fit for every student, and that number 3, they necessarily require money to perform well on. Judges, let me remind you that they never actually provided a mechanism throughout their speeches. They have never explained how standardized tests will be removed from the current education system, and with what quality way will they replace these standardized tests with. They also try to trivialize our main arguments, which will be discussed shortly, by using claims that were never actually backed up with actual evidence, and instead used mere assumptions to counter our logical evidence-based arguments. So let's move on to the first clash in the debate. On which sides are students, especially those who want to get into selective institutions, better off? We identified a problem that without standardized tests, students won't be able to show their worth to universities academically other than their transcript, which consists of academic grades. The government did not deny this problem exists, therefore, whichever side resolves this problem most effectively wins this debate. So let's go on to our side's short-term argument. We said that without standardized tests, universities would not have the opportunity to effectively compare students' abilities. Since we are defending the status quo, we do not need to implement a mechanism here apart from keeping the status quo as it is, which is to keep standardized tests such as the ACT, SAT, International Baccalaureate, and any other tests that are the same for everyone worldwide, or in other words, standardized. They provided a different short-term outcome for the same stakeholder that we, the opposition, identified, students. They negatively characterized standardized tests and went on to say that the government should remove standardized tests completely because they're stressful, don't match to every student because of certain anxiety problems, and make students burn out and reduce their social interactions. They also went on to say that having the best scores in standardized tests necessarily requires paying huge sums of money that not all students have. So let us respond one final time to each of these arguments. Firstly, the first Gov speaker claimed that scientific studies have been shown to that standardized tests are an enemy for education. A POI asked by the opposition has been given, asking for evidence of these scientific studies that concluded that standardized tests are an enemy of education. They responded that they didn't need to justify themselves since it's common knowledge. We believe that this is not common knowledge because one cannot just assume something and justify it by calling it scientific. On the other hand, our side, the opposition, has provided thorough logical arguments that refuted this assumption made by the government, including, but not limited to, number one, standardized tests offer universities another way to compare students worldwide, other than just looking at a student's transcript. And number two, standardized tests increase a student's chances in getting into certain colleges by being able to prove their worth. They also claim that students are focused on getting high marks, but may not be able to do so because of certain problems, just as anxiety. They also said that standardized tests don't define who you are and cause you to burn out and reduce human interaction. To all of these 3 points, we tell you to not forget that with great dreams come great sacrifice. If a student wants to get accepted in a very selective school such as Harvard, Oxford, etc., no thank you, they very well know that immense amounts of efforts need to be put in. Therefore, standardized tests are not the only type of test where students will need to put a lot of effort in. Moreover, if a student only aims for a normal university, then they won't have to put the same effort that a student that wants to go to a prestigious university would. They can just aim for an average score, which would allow them to get accepted in these universities. I'll be now taking a POI.
How about when Harvard, Brown, and all these universities you are trying to say that you should sacrifice for, remove the SAT and ACT scores from their acceptance?
Well, they did make it optional, which is another part that we would like to move on later on, which is that we don't necessarily need to pay for these standardized tests, and that standardized tests are just an additional way to prove yourself to. But still, as we have previously talked, these standardized tests allow you to show your worth, and is just another way for these schools to see and compare other students. Now, moving on to our long-term change. And before I move on to that, I would also like to talk about also lastly, just reinstate that if an average student would like to go in an average school, quote unquote, they can just aim for an average grade. Now, our long-term change was that without standardized tests, students who are capable and deserving to get into their desired universities have their chances taken away, and that real talent goes unfortunately unnoticed due to standardized tests being removed. Many students aren't able to succeed in standardized tests since they don't have the money to buy learning material, quote unquote, the second speaker of government. So we respond to that by saying a couple of things. Firstly, there are many online free SAT resources, just Khan Academy. There are many free online resources to prepare for standardized testing and fee waivers for the standardized tests themselves. So thank you. When we responded by saying that the government acknowledges but calls these resources not helpful at all. This argument is not again backed by any evidence. On the contrary, we will now provide you with evidence that these online resources are in fact extremely helpful for students. 5 points on that. Number one, these online resources offer personalized practice plans for each student based on a diagnostic tests or previous standardized test scores, such as the SAT. Number two, these online resources offer several full-length real practice tests and content created in partnership with the very corporations that create these standardized tests, such as College Board, which creates the SAT and ACTs. Number three, thousands of practice questions, videos, lessons, and hints, plus study and test-taking tips and strategies are offered by these online resources. No, thank you. Number four, students are given constant feedback and progress so they know where they stand. And finally, number five, many of the expensive books, as said by the Gov, are not interactive since, of course, they're physical books. Therefore, in a lot of cases, students will find themselves using online resources more than the books they bought. Moreover, these paid resources are often subject to, unfortunately, heavy marketing that promises the highest scores in standardized tests and are actually, in reality, not of real quality. They're just there for people to buy. No, thank you. Lastly, before ending my speech, I would like to reinstate our principal argument, which is that governments have a duty to protect students' future. If you choose our policy, ops policy, then you're choosing a world where students have the advantage of proving their worth to universities other than their academic grades. Students would not have to compensate by adding even more energy to prove themselves to universities due to the government removing a valuable asset, standardized test scores, from a student's application. And for all of these reasons that have been previously stated, and for the fact that throughout their entire speeches they have not used any evidence, and that we have broken down every single of the Gov's arguments and proved them why they do not stand and why our arguments stand, we urge you to vote for Team Morocco, the opposition. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now have the reply speech by Team Morocco. Adia.
Okay, 1 second. Just want to put on my thing. Okay. It goes without saying that everyone in the world deserves and needs the opportunity to have an equal and fair education, which is exactly what Team Morocco and the opposition is advocating for in this debate. In this speech, I will be doing 3 things. Number 1, I will be comparing the 2 worlds. Number 2, I'll be comparing the burdens of each side. And number 3, I will be comparing the clashes of this debate. So first, let's do an overview of the debate by analyzing the 2 worlds. The proposition's world. The proposition is offering you a world that would remove an opportunity for millions of poor, low-income students. They are giving you a world where low-income, poor students would not have the chance to prove themselves to universities, where richer students in the United States or any other developed country would have greater chances of getting into prestigious universities. The proposition is offering you a world of corruption, a world where grades are not identical in schools, a world where middle-class American students, for example, would obtain an A with half the effort that an Indian, a Korean, any other student obtains with that same work. And in general, the proposition is offering you a world where education is biased, stained with inequality and imbalance. On the other hand, we've painted you a world where students are given an opportunity to prove that they meet the universal academic standard. Our world is an objective world where globally students are given the same questions, the same time, and the same space to prove themselves and their hard work. Our world is a fair and equitable world where students, teachers, and administrators are held accountable for their work and their practices. Most importantly, we've painted you a world where that gives millions of students living in poor developing countries, run-down neighborhoods, ineffective schools with inexperienced teachers, biased administrators, and poor learning curriculums another chance at life. The proposition has given you a utopian vision, one where standardized tests are merely an inconvenience that can be removed off the school's agenda. We have given you a reality, one that demonstrates how these tests are a necessity, something that students depend on. Now let's look at some of the burdens of the 2 sides. The first burden of this debate was to prove that standardized tests are a good measuring educational tool. The proposition repeatedly told you about how standardized tests stress students out, how they're unhealthy, and how they compare students' abilities, but the proposition never really explained to you why standardized tests are uniquely stress-inducing, nor how removing these tests would remove the unhealthy comparisons of students worldwide. There still exists exams, competition, finals, and other important academic tests in student lives. The proposition has never fulfilled the burden of analyzing how removing standardized tests would benefit students. Instead, they've painted you a world that harms students and removes their chances of proving their merit, especially for low-income, poor students. On our side of the debate, we've fulfilled this burden. We've told you about how without standardized tests, universities would not have the opportunity to effectively compare students' abilities. We've explained to you how these standardized tests, if these standardized tests were removed, students would not be compared by universities on a fair and equal scale, and how for many of these poor low-income students, the SAT is a necessity. So which side provided a better outcome? Throughout their speech, proposition has continuously advocated to remove these tests, but they've never explained how their world would reduce the disparity between rich and poor students. They've never given you a mechanism. The proposition has done nothing but debate and characterize a utopian world where things are magically fixed once the standardized tests are eliminated. We've told you that in our world, we give students the chance of proving their abilities and their competence at a universal scale, Removing these tests would be stealing these students' opportunities to reach their potential. We've proven to you time and time again that our world provides greater benefits than the proposition. When we compare the two worlds, the clash points, and the team's abilities to fulfill their burdens, it goes without saying that the opposition has won this debate, which is why I proudly urge the judge to vote for opposition and for Team Morocco. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. We will now have the final speech of today's debate, which would be the reply speech by Amir.
Give me some seconds to set my timer, please.
Yeah, no worries.
So I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, welcome to our reply speech. I will tackle the two main clash points of this debate, and I will respond to three main questions that will explain why we won this debate proposition team. First clash point is that standardized tests are stressing students and making them lose confidence in themselves. We explained that these tests are making students worry more about the results. We explained that these tests are affecting the self-esteem of students, affecting their mental health, and creating peer pressure. Opposition claimed this, but they named it competition in hard work. This competition that the proposition was talking about is harming the learning process. They are making students worry more about the results than in scores they are getting more than what they are learning. Through all your arguments, your examples of position, you conveyed the struggle of students taking standardized tests that are aiming to score better, not to learn better. So we went over this clash point as the peer pressure and the value of scores instead of academic assessment are killing learning and the joy of learning. Another major clash point of this debate is the gap that standardized tests are creating between students. We explained that standardized tests are discriminating students who do not have the money to pay for tests or test preparation. They do not have same chances to learn from their mistakes and get more knowledge, as they do not have the money to pay for tutors to help them prepare or for another fee of the test. Scholarships that are sometimes available for disadvantaged students that the opposition team talked about are very limited and create more gap between students who are eligible for this scholarship and students who are not. Opposition team agreed on that gap through the examples of scholarships and free materials, for students. So they claimed that standardized tests are creating inequalities between all different kinds of students. So we went over this clash point too. Now moving to three questions. One, is the status quo good enough? The status quo is not as idyllic as you want to convey a position team. Scholarships for the tests are not offered in every country. They are limited and they demand strict requirements. So in the status quo there is a big inequality between students. Students in the status quo are not evaluated for how they learn, but they are for how much knowledge they have, but for how much money they can pay. Even the content that is offered for them online is making more pressure on the students and making them eager to pay more in order to practice more and get more knowledge. And in the status quo, there is an inequality that the opposition team have neglected, and they didn't speak about at all. Which word is fair in a world where not every candidate have access to the tests, limiting the chances of students to demonstrate their abilities to college, and who pays more gets more knowledge. This is in an unfair world. In our world where every student have the chance to sit for tests equally without any fees, any extra fees, in order to demonstrate their abilities with same chances. This is a fair world. So our world is more this is also an answer to the third question, which is which word is more effective to solve the problem of a city where we give students the spaces to study at the same paces with no pressure, without any worry. In our world, we provide the same chances for all the students to learn without any barriers, and so that's why we want this debate. Proud to propose.